We're with Jason Scavone, talking about the new album, Catastrophic Dreams.
Sir.
We've talked about the first release, Old Friend.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking about a second release. Apparently the album has more than one track on it.
Yeah, I thought that would be important. Yeah.
And we're talking about a song called Screens.
That's right.
Speaking of screens, what the heck are we looking at here on this screen? This looks intense. What is this? Are these all tracks on this recording? I mean, what's going on here?
So anybody who uses a DAW or Pro Tools in particular here knows this is the mix window of Pro Tools. So these are all the tracks. Yeah. So we've got a bunch of audio tracks.
It's striking me like there's a lot
happening.
There are a lot of tracks here.
Yeah, I'm scrolling here. There's a lot.
Is this typical? Is this more than usual for a song?
No,
Is it? I mean, give us a sense of how to fit this in context.
This is typical. I mean, this is not an enormous session by any stretch. You got to think about it. You've got, how many pieces on a drum kit? You've got a kick drum, a snare drum, a couple toms.
And each one of those would have an individual track on here?
Yeah, sometimes more than one microphone, right?
I want to hear a snare.
Okay.
I want to see how good you are.
Okay.
Get you to the test.
So here is the snare drum. Well, let me get to it. Yeah, so there's a snare drum.
Well, you passed that test pretty quickly.
Yeah. But the snare drum is also coming through this beautiful guy here. So the KS mic, stole that from Eric Valentine.
That's a different mic.
Kick and snare. It's underneath the snare rather on the batter side of the kick. You've got the room mics picking up the snare. The overhead picks up the snare. So you've got all these different tracks, ambient mics picking up the drums. You've got a couple mics on an acoustic guitar, bass mic. I might have two mics on the bass cabinet or a direct signal on a bass and a mic on the cabinet. So there's a lot of different sources that are making their way into this mix window here.
Wow.
But yeah, so the drums we finally replaced, and I ended up putting the drums in a booth. We have a decent sized booth you can fit a drum kit in, but it normally operates as a vocal booth. Real dry, dead sounding room. I wanted to get a tight, dead drum sound with not a lot of ambience, and that's what we ended up going for. So different than Old Friend, which is, although a simple song, had a much more involved drum miking setup. This is a pretty simple drum miking setup. There's two kick drum mics, one snare. The toms are close mic'd, although I don't think he hits a tom the entire
So we're looking at all drums here on the left-hand column here.
Yeah, these are the drums. So there's an overhead, a room, which was about 4 or 5 feet away, a room mic, close mic toms, one snare, and two kick mics.
So what is these bus? Those are bussing. What is going on there? We got K bus, drum bus. What is that?
These are auxiliary tracks. So I'm bussing the kick. Both of these kick mics.
Does that literally mean you're moving?
Yeah, like hopping on the bus and driving over to this auxiliary, and they're hitting a compressor together. So there's a little bit of additional parallel compression, and there's a transient designer. This is basically just kind of tightening up getting rid of some of the room ambience as well.
Got it.
And then the drums are all being bussed to this drum aux, which is again a little extra compression, and this wonderful Wolf compressor. Although I'm not hitting the compressor much with this, it adds like a lo-fi feature. And again, it's one of those things where you don't realize what goes into this. You know what I mean? When you think about a song of this. Now not all these are,
because you're building it as you go, right?
Yeah, not some of these are individual tracks. Some of these are auxes, with
So
reverb.
is each vertical here a
So
track?
think about this as a virtual recording console. So this is like a desk console on a screen. So yeah, each one of these faders is a track, and some of these are audio tracks, kick drum, in and out mic. Some of these are buses. So I might be, or not like an auxiliary. I might be bussing or sending.
That's bussing. That's bussing. The kids say that, right? That's
That's
a whole teenage term.
What does that mean?
Well, it depends who you ask, when you ask, but I've heard that it relates to food being good, but I've also heard it's more general to just something that's really cool. That's bussing.
Well, in this context, it's think about it like taking a bus.
We're
driving.
Zero chance I'm not going to use this.
What's an endless ocean in my mind?
talk about the song and the vibe and so forth, but just back us up. Where did the song come from? What was the inspiration? What's the song about? How did the idea pop in your head? Where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah, so during, again, this is another pandemic song, right?
It's a pandemic album.
It's a pandemic album. So this song was written, I was just thinking a lot about screens, we were all spending a lot of time on screens.
Literally. Screens, computer
Literal
screens, phone screens.
You know, my kids were doing, my son at the time, my daughter wasn't in school, my son was doing remote school. All school was virtual via screen. You know, everybody was communicating through social media on screens. Everybody was getting their news from their
having
screens,
business
their devices,
meetings on screens.
Business meetings. People were working remotely. Everything was happening remotely because we were all at home, or or just isolating in some way, shape, or form.
So you've got this concept, screens, very appropriate for the time.
Mm-hmm.
How does it morph from a concept to an actual melody, an actual song?
Well, I was thinking about the fact that it sort of was a bittersweet situation. The screens. This is pre-pandemic. I wanted as little screen time as I could get. I wanted to avoid screens. But now thinking as a musician about the fact that I couldn't play gigs, I couldn't have people in the studio.
Yeah.
How was I going to? How not just me, but how were we as artists going to reach people and connect with people? And here was this way that we could do that. And I was thinking about those people who were live streaming. I was thinking about you, who was doing album reviews of all the vinyl you were listening to during your downtime, and writing these really wonderful, just these reviews of the record, but also bringing in your personal connection to the record and stories that you had. All those moments that we were able to share through screens, and the thing I could do was I could share a song, and we could maybe come together, and it was like let's unify through through music via our remote connection with one another.
So that's interesting because when we talked about Old Friend,
Mm-hmm.
the first release, it sort of had this timeless nostalgia to it that felt like it could apply. We talked about the cover art, 1960, 1980, 2020.
Right.
Screens, it's maybe more of a time period piece. I mean,
Absolutely,
it's very much the now, 2021.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, and and we live at it's you and I had to adapt to screens as a concept, just like being attached to screens. We weren't born into it, but younger generations, that's all they've known, and it's just a part of life. And so there's this disconnect, I think, from one generation to the next. But we all had to succumb to it. We've all had to just adapt and allow it to, just accept that it's a part of life. And so I was nervous about music having its way. It's finding a way to reach people with music, and what I found during the pandemic was people were turning to art. They were consuming art. They were listening to records. They were whatever the medium was. They were doing it more probably than they had in years, if not ever, because they had all this time. We all had this time to do that, and it's pretty amazing that we can all connect remotely in this way, in a way that we couldn't before.
And we can sing the words together.
Is that actually the chorus lyric?
Mm-hmm.
That come from? It's kind of got this post distortion. I don't know. There's just weird vibe, but you're hearing the vocal lyric underneath.
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing there?
So that came at the very end. I added that when the song was complete. That's Carly Taish singing with me on that, and we had finished all the tracking on its own. It just felt really nice.
Yeah.
So I wanted to put it at the beginning, but I wanted to make it sound old. Yeah. I wanted to make it feel like a contrast to the the song, which is about this modern technology, I wanted it to feel like an old vintage radio, like you're kind of, trying to tune in and just get things,
and you're not
get the
getting
signal
it,
just right. And you can't quite
you're
get
not getting it perfect.
Yeah,
you're not getting a perfect sound,
you're
and then the song starts, and it's like this clarity just kind of hits you.
Yeah, exactly.
So the song, when it kicks in, it's got this really neat guitar part, kind of jangly or something. But when I first heard it, it reminded me of being very 70s inspired. Like I felt like a 70s summer song to me. That's kind of, and it's funny because you're talking about screens during 2020, 21, but yet the mood that connected with me was way more of a throwback than
it does have that.
Than a concept of looking through screens.
Yeah.
During the pandemic.
That contrast was definitely there, and even like the choruses when we worked on the guitar part. That's Peter Gray on the guitar. Like the guitar is a real Jackson Brown kind of sounding. Bonk, 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 it's just got a real, real 70s kind of feel. So I wanted to, especially for this song, but I wanted to collaborate with people that were not just my normal, in my normal circle. I wanted the core band to be the guys, my best buddies that I play music with all the time, that are, amazing musicians right here in town. But I wanted to bring in other people. I brought Carly in, my sister, Jackson Smith, or other folks on different songs. And I knew we couldn't get together in person again, so
you sent her a file.
Sent her files, and she recorded at a studio she has access to in Asheville, and just sent me the stems. So it worked out great. I lived with the scratch tracks, basically the original demo tracks that I was intending to replace later, for so long that I got really used to them, and I didn't want to get rid of them. So this is a scratch vocal. This is the original vocal that I sang when I came in here to just map the song out. That stayed.
And that stayed.
That's the final vocal. I tried to replace it and I couldn't beat it.
Maybe I could offer something, and I swear I will ask for nothing.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear what you sound like a cappella, man.
Uh-oh.
If you need a crutch, you can pull Carly in there too.
Definitely. I needed the crutch. That's why she's in there.
It isn't much, nothing like your touch, and we could sing the words.
This is the scratch that you laid down originally.
Together.
And you got her.
Together.
So much better.
Yeah. Now it's good.
Nothing like your touch.
Part of my writing process is the recording process at this point. So what I tend to do is, if I have a song idea, I'm never just thinking about the song as it stands when it's just me and my single instrument, my piano or my guitar. I'm always thinking about the arrangement, the instrumentation, the production from day one. So what I like to do is come in here and put down the song in a very simple form and begin to audition ideas, production ideas. What kind of drum feel could work with this? What kind of, what's the ornamentation that would really enhance this song in different ways? And so that's part of my process, and I'm lucky enough to have access to a studio to make that happen.
With screens, Jason, any significant musical references or inspiration that hit you when you were putting the song together?
Yeah, definitely with the drums and bass. There's a pretty direct nod to the song Deantown by Wolfpack, which...
Deantown.
Yeah, which I don't know if you, like, the average listener would notice that, and the band, I mean, they might not notice it unless you just...
So you listened to the song Deantown and then you ripped it off completely?
Yeah, just stole from them.
Okay. Well, that's easier than having to write it yourself.
No, I just liked this sort of 16th note bass movement against this drum groove. So Jonathan Erickson had come up with this chorus drum groove here. And so it starts off with this kind of grooving bass line, but halfway through the chorus, the vocal melody changes to this more sustained vocal melody, and when that happens, we wanted to do that same 16th note thing.
Oh, it's Deantown.
I mean, it's right there. So they definitely influenced me there.
Talk about the bass playing on this song and the album. Tell us about Stacy and his bass playing. How do you know Stacy? And
Stacy played New August years ago, Charlotte band. That's how I met him, and he was a sound man around town. He's a local legend, you know. So I was honored that he wanted to play music with me years ago, and we started playing together. But when he comes in here, Stacy, you know, he sits right next to me in the control room in a chair, and we just, it's similar to how I described it with Peter. We get into the song, and Stacy always has great production ideas. He thinks of bass playing like a producer. You know, he's really serving the song, and he has very creative ideas. But he'll say, I'm going to give you a little bit of this. And he'll give me one take on it. And be like, all right, well, what about this other flavor? And he tries this other thing. And then he kind of just trusts me to sort it out later. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. Sometimes I'll have some direction if I'm hearing something very specific, and he honors that. But he tends to have his own ideas, which always are great.
And I've heard Stacy say before that he never really does the same thing twice.
That's
so
true.
He's gonna give it everything, but you sort of get a variety of whatever the heck he decides to play at the time, right?
Yeah, and then he has to go back later and learn what he did because he forgot what he did. Because he doesn't do the same thing twice. But that can be cool because and then we have those moments like we had the other night with Catastrophic Dreams where the song becomes, you know, people like Peter and Stacy can reinvent the song in the moment.